Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, NFL Week 15. The boys are back in town. A shout out to our super fill-in Billy for taking care of the Week 14 Monday Night Football edition. Got all of our loyal Bet the Board listeners to the window. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, did you survive the frigid temperatures of the Northeast in early December?
Surprisingly handled it well. I was a little nervous about that whole situation, but the Vegas guys were complaining about it. Me?
I mean, look, you tell us all the time that those of us on the West Coast are a little bit softer than everybody else. So the Floridian goes up there, bundles himself up like an Eskimo, brings 37 jackets to make sure he can properly layer for those frigid temperatures. But survival was good. And again, thanks to Billy for filling in on Monday. We took our late season bye week, much like the Washington Commanders and the Arizona Cardinals. We'll come back refreshed, but unlike them, we have playoff aspirations around these parts.
Listen, this season has been so frustrating, and I think the way we talk about it to the
it's doom or gloom the way we talk about it. It's the end of the world and that kind of thing. Yep.
So, I mean, we were only down a couple positions, but I jokingly said to you, it's like we can make a lot of great bets that go awry in my office cave, right? But eventually, like let's just get out. Let's go do Army Navy. It led into the Knicks game Monday, the Rangers game on Tuesday, and best week of the season.
That's what it takes.
So,
shout out to O'Brien's in Danbury, Connecticut, the home of exactly what we needed to turn this mojo around and get a big Sunday. We had to sweat out that teaser. Of course, Tylan Wallace returning the punt to get the Ravens home as the first leg of our two-teamer there for listeners. And the Bears, despite chasing 3 points at the half, relative rocking chair, all things considered, with that dominant second-half performance. So this ship is officially headed in the right direction, and we will no doubt finish with a flourish. For those college football listeners wondering about a bowl podcast, you should be following the Bet the Board Twitter handle. We'll make some of those announcements there. As always, we'll cover the biggest games and still some tenuous plans about getting to some of those second-tier games. And I say second-tier, Payne, because I feel like it provides the perfect segue into the football game we're going to have on Thursday night between the Chargers and Raiders. As we sit here Thursday morning, nobody quite sure exactly what players will or won't be out there for this particular contest, and you see the market continuing to respond. The Raiders, a consensus 3-point favorite now, playing host to the Chargers. Total on the game 34.5, and this is a number where we saw money come in early in the week on the Chargers, get as high as the Raiders minus 3.5, but it is an absolute laundry list of the players that won't be available. What we do know, though, is that Easton Stick will make his NFL starting debut for the Chargers. Justin Herbert out for the remainder of the season. And the proud product of North Dakota State will have a big stage to try and do so. When we look at the Raiders, they come into this game off a 3-0 loss versus the Vikings. It was actually the lowest scoring indoor game in NFL history that we saw on Sunday, in the first 3-0 game in the NFL since Pittsburgh and Miami back in 2007. When you look at these two teams, two of the best under teams in the league, both 10-3 to the under this season. The home team, though, has dominated this divisional rivalry, going 5-0 straight up and ATS over the last 5 meetings. So rather than a full deep dive for this particular contest, Payne, when you look at a handicap and try and identify something that might be actionable, what have you uncovered? Is it Easton Stick going nuclear against the Raiders defense, or is it the soon-to-be benched Aiden O'Connell with a somewhat healthy Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers? No idea who's going to be in the backfield. They're going to be blocking against a Chargers defense that'll have to try and play with their hair on fire.
Yeah, here we are. I mean, this is a glorified preseason game. This would be like the Super Bowl of preseason games. That's what we have here on Thursday night. You mentioned Easton Stick versus Aiden O'Connell. O'Connell certainly looking over his shoulder at this point because Antonio Pierce is trying to keep his job, and all the players in that locker room love Antonio Pierce so much they're trying to keep his job. So you might see a situation where it's Hoyer or Garoppolo down the stretch, which would just be a stupid decision.
The most Raiders thing ever.
From
Unmitigated disaster, most Raiders thing ever if you go back to veterans rather than letting O'Connell continue to go out there and hone his craft.
Right. You either figure out what you have in O'Connell. If he's not the guy, you lose a couple games at this point because your season's already over and you get better draft position. You can't let the locker room con you in if you're Mark Davis into like saying, hey, Antonio Pierce is our guy. Let's go trot Hoyer and Garoppolo out there and try to go 2-2 down the stretch. But it's not just Easton Stick versus Aiden O'Connell. You mentioned some of those other key cogs out for the Raiders offensively, right? It's Colton Miller potentially and Andre James up front along the O-line. Josh Jacobs, highly questionable with that quad injury. We just saw as we were about to come on air, Devontae Adams came down with an illness but is going to play. Then you have Keenan Allen, who's also out. I think what's interesting here is you, in a perfect world, would like the Chargers to be able to run the ball. That's where you want to attack the Raiders. They're a bottom 10 run defense. The problem is the Chargers offense has not been able to get push up front all season. We have heard the rumblings of Austin Eckler getting up there in age, not being overly explosive, not being very fast. Did get the ground game going a little bit last week. I think you're going to see more of Austin Eckler as a pass catcher tonight, especially with how the Raiders play their defense. We did see some explosives down the field in catch-up mode against Denver last week, but the way the Raiders play their defense, it's very much beat us with the dink and dunk game, and that's really where the sample size is obviously small for Easton Stick. But you go back, he's got over 250 preseason reps. He struggles with his accuracy. He's got 8 turnovers and 4 touchdown passes in those 250-plus preseason snaps. So is he going to be the guy that's going to matriculate the ball down the field with accuracy? I don't know. This comes down to price. And if you're betting it, that's all it's about. We were sitting in a car service headed to the city on Sunday night, and we saw the Raiders minus 1.5. We're like, that's not going to last. And then we got to 3.5 even early this morning at some of the sharper shops on the Chargers. That price isn't going to last. So this game very much has been number dependent, price dependent, because there's not much out there, and there's not many paths for great matchups either. Sure, I guess you say Aiden O'Connell maybe hitting some explosives down the field, but again, like how healthy is Devontae Adams with this illness?
They didn't even try and throw downfield last week against the Vikings.
No. Well, it's difficult, right? Like what Brian Flores is doing defensively for the Vikings is
wizardry
nuts.
and masterful.
Yeah, it's really taken a play out of some college defensive playbooks where we're going like 5-man defensive fronts. We're sending pressures, but we're using 3 safeties. We're using 5 defensive backs, and it's really caused some issues in season. It's one of those things where a lot of offenses will have to evaluate it out of season and kind of figure out the right way to attack that. But in season, it's much more difficult on a week-to-week basis. So Aiden O'Connell was confused, and I don't know if you're going to get those looks. But the Chargers defense in these spots in the ring against a fighter that's of its weight class has shown pretty well in certain spots this season. I would expect the same here. So for me, nothing on this game. If it got to 3.5 as a widely available number on the Chargers, I'd unfortunately maybe have to consider like a value bet there, but it hasn't popped at 3.5, and so I'm more than happy just being an onlooker or going to bed early here. There's just not much in this spot, candidly.
Yeah, it's a tough game to handicap, and I think you see that even with the number ping-ponging around the key of 3, the total hasn't had much movement. 33.5, 34.5, haven't gotten to 35. And we'll see exactly what these two quarterbacks bring to the table. Clearly, Easton Stick being the backup in L.A. over the last couple of years speaks volumes about what he's been able to do as a consummate professional. It's a player that just won at the FCS level, but you mentioned it. You have the preseason sample size of sorts, and it's not as though Easton Stick has gone out there and looked like preseason Jesus by any stretch of the imagination when it comes to a touchdown-interception ratio, and with an extremely limited skill position core at his disposal. We'll see if they can get Quentin Johnston going down the field, or maybe a little bit of a ground game if Max Crosby is unable to go for the Raiders, knowing that he has been touch and go every single week, and a quick turnaround here, having just played on Sunday in a very physical game against the Minnesota Vikings. Fortunately, no matter how the game goes on Thursday night, we don't have to wait until Sunday to get our next NFL action, a trio of very intriguing games taking place on Saturday. And while we would love to have broken all of them down, look, time constraints do play a role in all of this, so we'll stick to the primetime game between the Denver Broncos and the Detroit Lions. The Lions a 4-point favorite in this spot. Total in the game, 47.5, and the Lions will enter the game Saturday night with a 2-game lead on the Vikings in the NFC North. The teams will meet Week 16 and Week 18. The Lions, as we've talked about all season long, still seeking their first division title since 1993. On the other side, this is a Broncos team who started the season absolutely dreadful, and some of the NFL projection sites out there had their playoff probabilities well under 1%. That storyline has changed as Sean Payton has this team firing on all cylinders, going 6-1 in their last 7 games. Denver looking to be the fifth team in NFL history to make the postseason after a 1-5 start. That, of course, does come with the caveat 17 games. Gives you a hell of a lot more runway than 16 games does. And the Broncos right now, with a little bit of luck and Kansas City struggles, may have an outside chance to be division champs, although it feels like a pipe dream. They do have favorable matchups down the stretch, though, when you look at some of their opposing quarterbacks. But Payne, the Broncos will come into this game playing their 3rd straight road game at Houston, at the Chargers, and now flying across the country to play in the Eastern time zone. The Broncos have gone under in 7 of their last 8 games, 5-2 ATS over the last 7, but the Lions have been one of the best home teams in the NFL, going 16-7 against the number under Dan Campbell. The last time, though, we saw them here on Thanksgiving, they stubbed their toe, to say the least, against the Green Bay Packers. But desperate times call for desperate measures, and there's a reason to be optimistic that the Lions could be a little bit healthier along that offensive line this week than what we've seen over the past couple installments.
So you led us into Saturday and mentioned 2 of the earlier games. And so you have those 4 teams all at 7-6 vying for the playoffs. And it seems like they're great matchups. The reality is none of those 4 teams, Vikings, Bengals, Steelers, Colts, are power rated above league average, if you can believe it. And that's just kind of how wild this season's been. And so we really haven't touched on it. We can just go graze through these, right? Vikings extremely sharp at 4 or better. Now there's some offensive line issues there, and it's 3. So I mean, it's very difficult to get there. The Colts, to me, are a team that's downtrending. Love Shane Steichen, but
just limited.
Just a team's a bit of a phony. The defense is an absolute sieve, and I think as you kind of see what Gardner Minshew is, he's been horrific in the last couple of weeks. So. To the Saturday night game here of Broncos Lions, which is to me a pretty damn good game, and we've seen strong stances from professional bettors, both side and total on this. You know, the originated total here over 46.5 below the key is interesting because it's kind of a zip code Broncos games haven't lived in for nearly 8 weeks. But it appears like the Lions are the side here. So they're going to be pushing Denver a bit. And there's some intriguing matchups for both teams. And right off the bat, if you look, Denver is stepping down in class defensively. Denver's faced one of the 10 hardest schedules of defenses. The Broncos have only played 1 bottom 10 defense this season. And now you get, I would say, a downtrending Lions defense right now. They're 30th in EPA allowed since week 7. The Lions' pass defense is allowing over 50% of passes to great successful over that same stretch. And you look against the 2 defenses that Denver's played that are bottom 10 in the NFL. They've managed to score 33 and 24 points in those games. If you watch close enough and dig into the numbers, the Broncos are really moving the ball. They're just stalling out in the red zone. Since week 7, the Broncos rank 3rd in rate of drives that reach the red zone. The positive for them is there's likely regression for the Broncos offense there because the Lions rank dead last in touchdowns allowed in the red zone since week 7. So if you're making those trips and now all of a sudden you're facing a defense that surrenders touchdowns, your touchdown rate likely to go up. Now, does that happen in a 1-game, 60-minute sample size? Who knows? But these are the kind of things you're looking for. I think we talked about a month ago the Broncos' NBA style of offense where it's either a layup or a 3. One of those variations of a Broncos layup is throwing to running backs. Detroit, one of the worst in the league defending running back passes. You also have Russell Wilson, who isn't Justin Fields by any stretch, but something we mentioned ahead of the best bet last week was the Lions defense being one of the 3 worst, and EPA surrendered to quarterback runs. So Russell Wilson's legs likely a little bit of a factor here, whether it's extending drives with, his version of runs. On the other side, though, I don't see a situation where Detroit is not finding offensive success, despite, showing some struggles here recently. I think Ben Johnson's able to get this thing fired up because the Lions should be able to run the ball really well in the spot. Ran shockingly well without Ragnow against a good Bears run defense. Now you get the Broncos, who struggle to stop the run, 31st in defensive rush efficiency allowed. The Broncos give up gobs of explosive runs as well. You also look at the schedule of run offenses in recent weeks Denver's faced. Number 32, number 26. Now they're stepping up in class. The Broncos have been gashed twice on the ground against run offenses in the same class of Detroit's. You also get Goff back home in a dome environment with run support. And Goff has absolutely torched the coverages that Denver plays most. He also should have his security blanket in Laporta open as well. The Broncos are 31st in the NFL defending tight ends. So you get that ground game going. You get Goff throwing with play action. You get him throwing with play action in the dome to his tight end. And so there's just a lot of really, really great matchups for the Lions offense here, Todd.
You mentioned the Broncos run defense, and they've allowed more than 40% of opponent rushes to gain 5 or more yards during this 6-1 stretch, which is 29th in the NFL. Meanwhile, here come the Lions ranking 2nd in the NFL with 5.3 yards per rush over that same time span. And you mentioned Detroit, the one team that's been able to run on the Chicago Bears, not just last Sunday, but even able to do so the first meeting where the Lions had to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat, erasing that late double-digit deficit. And that's even before this is a Broncos defense that on a short week, traveling yet again, dealing with some injuries. You had a couple of key contributors that have really risen their level of play, and Nick Bodino and P.J. Locke that were DNPs yesterday. We'll want to monitor their status to figure all that stuff out. So you're going to get a desperate Detroit team, given how they were embarrassed in the second half. I mean, Jared Goff didn't shy away from how they've struggled in the third quarter all season long. I give Dan Campbell a ton of credit for not throwing Ben Johnson under the bus for the offensive game plan we saw against the Bears. And you love when a guy like Dan Campbell, Payne, says he's going to go into practice this week a lot more irritable than what he's been in the past. So you have to imagine in prime time, given what we've seen from the Lions each of the last couple of weeks, this team will be a little bit better than how they fared on that Thanksgiving Day against the Green Bay Packers. Into Sunday we go, though, and this is a game that if you had told me 3 or 4 weeks ago would have made the podcast rotation, I would have laughed at you. But you have one team trending in a very positive direction and another quietly putting together a run, and it's rare we break down a team that's 5-8 against 8-5, but you do have a prominent fan base. And Cole Kmet said the Bears could run the table, and if they do, the Bears may be able to get into the NFC playoff picture. They'll travel to Cleveland to take on the Browns, and it's the Browns a 3-point favorite. That number juice trending towards 3.5. Total of 38.5 in this contest, and the Browns can secure their second winning season under head coach Kevin Stefanski. They went 11-5 back in 2020, which got Stefanski Coach of the Year. He would become the first Browns head coach with multiple winning seasons since Marty Schottenheimer did so in 1986 to 1988. You want to talk about futility for a fan base? That is the perfect stat to embody all of that. Whereas the Bears, this was a team that was riding a franchise record 14-game losing streak at one point this year. They've now won 5 of their past 9, 13th place in the NFC, but still a path that exists there. And they've shown a level of defensive dominance as they've gotten healthier. Jalen Johnson and Montez Sweat providing a tremendous twosome. But Payne, this is a Bears defense that's going to lose a key contributor in Yannick Ngakoue, lost for the season with a busted ankle, and against Joe Flacco and a resurgent vertical passing game from the Browns. When you look at this matchup, is it the Bears offense against the tenacious Cleveland defense, or is it Joe Flacco, anointed starting quarterback the remainder of the season, against a resurgent stop unit for Chicago?
So I think the first thing we talk about here is the price, because there has been full-blown battles on both sides in total here. Open 38, got sent under. Over money comes back in, you're at 38.5. Early Browns money at 2.5, gets to 3.5. A lot of Bears money. And so I think there's going to be a battle. When you look at the injury reports for both teams, you kind of see why that battle is happening. The secondary injuries for the Browns are piling up. I think, just based upon how we've viewed some things, we've had some opportunities on both these teams. So the way they have been priced in the last couple of weeks, they've been buy teams for professional bettors, right? I mean, the Bears have been getting bought. The Browns have been getting bought. So I always kind of take those teams when they're playing each other, whether it's two sell teams or two buy teams, and I kind of am a little bit more tentative to move. I think if you're looking at this and saying, hey, the Bears were at 3.5, that's kind of where the market is right now, or at like 3.25. The way the Bears are going to potentially cover this number is, one, their run defense gets back to the way it was playing prior to last week. And the Browns' run game has been downtrending quite a bit with all of their offensive line injuries. We know both tackles were out. Now you have the center, Ethan Posick, which is, highly questionable. Ford dinged up as well. And so are you going to be able to take advantage of the Bears' defense there? The secondary with Jalen Johnson has been making great strides. We know Flacco is come out of retirement. I won't say off the couch, because all the indicators this season was he wanted to be back in the league, so he'd been kind of busting his tail, and he's come out and he's shown in these spots.
Dude's getting money. Payne, the comeback player of the year, was like 200 to 1, and I think last check I saw him at 35 to 1, making a late charge for a little bit of hardware.
I mean, Flacco's going to be able to throw a football like 70 miles per hour from his casket. I mean, the guy just has a cannon. It just doesn't matter, right? And you're thinking about the environment of which he plays late in the season, right? Cleveland weather. And so you're quietly a little bit of an uptick there. And that was the reason for some Browns money last week. But he's played some subpar pass defenses in his two matchups, and the Bears are trending a little bit better there. On the other side, you start to look at that matchup, and you think about Justin Fields. You think about how the Browns play their defense. I mentioned some of those secondary injuries. Is Ward going to be able to finally return? We know Newsome's a little bit dinged up. Delpit is going to be out. Is Fields the type of quarterback that can take full advantage of that? My guess is down through the air, no, but he'll have an opportunity to hit a couple explosives, whether it's Mooney. We did just see DJ Moore on Wednesday miss practice with an ankle injury. Is he going to be 100%? So I think it's probably going to be a little bit of a boom or bust offense for the Bears, especially when you think about how the Browns play their defense. They've been very much boom or bust. You also think about the Browns' coverage, play a ton of man coverage. Is Jim Shorts going to change that up a little bit if he's got injuries in the secondary? If he doesn't, and he goes gobs of man, not only are the explosives open through the air with some backups back there, but inevitably Justin Fields' legs are going to be a monster factor there when you got guys playing man coverage and their backs are to Justin Fields. So I think there's an opportunity where, down, the Bears offense probably doesn't look great, but there's going to be drives where if you can hit an explosive or two, you might be able to finagle some points onto the board there. Again, for me, it's like in this situation, if it got down to 2.5 because there's a massive wave of Bears money, I might consider coming in on like a cheap money line price on the Browns. If this somehow crept back to 3.5 and the injury report looks good with DJ Moore's ankle and a couple more guys who are highly questionable for the Browns get downgraded, like I'd like to probably buy the Bears at 3.5. So to me, this is one of those very, very price-sensitive games, especially when you think about the execution of your buy with a total at 38. Right? If you're buying the Browns, you're probably trying to do it at a depressed money line price. If you're buying the Bears, you absolutely need the hook when you think about that total being at 38.5.
Such an interesting game with a lot of moving pieces there. You mentioned one, I think the key components is you look at these two teams that have often been buy-on teams. So over the last couple of weeks, the Browns offense looking a little bit more complete with Joe Flacco coming in, giving them more of a vertical passing game. You've seen Amari Cooper benefit immensely, but David Njoku has been outstanding in that regard. We'll see if Cole Kmet and the Bears are able to replicate some of the success that Evan Ingram had. It wasn't explosives, but it was death by 10,000 paper cuts, as Ingram was the true beneficiary, knowing how well Newsome and Emerson played on the outside. You saw struggles coming from Zay Jones and Calvin Ridley, but the Jags were able to move the ball in the middle of the field. Should be a great game Sunday afternoon. You can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, for all things Bet the Board, you're going to want to follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And like we said, for all you college football fans that are looking to get your fix, nothing on the horizon for the handful of games that we'll see this weekend, but some schedule updates coming there as it pertains to more the secondary matchups than anything else. As always, the college football playoff and a lot of those big New Year's 6 bowl games will be covered post-Christmas holiday. Cowboys and Bills, Payne. The Dallas Cowboys sitting at 10-3 right now, not in control of their own destiny, but they win out. They can continue to put pressure on the Philadelphia Eagles to win the NFC East. Meanwhile, the Buffalo Bills, victorious last week against the Kansas City Chiefs, now one game over 500. If you look at their schedule, you don't ever say a team can afford to lose a game, but if Buffalo was going to lose one, it better be here, because with the AFC on tap for the next 3, all those tiebreakers, they're going to need all the help they can get, given their current standing. And the Cowboys come in on a 5-game win streak. It sees them as a 2-point underdog. Total in the game, 50.5. That win streak, though, for the Dallas Cowboys, tied for the longest active streak in the NFL alongside the 49ers. They were able to clinch their 3rd straight season at 10-plus wins versus Philadelphia, making that the longest such streak for the Dallas Cowboys since a 6-season stretch from 1991 to 96. The difference then versus now, they won 3 Super Bowls during that particular stretch under Jimmy Johnson and Barry Switzer. 8 20-point wins for the Cowboys this year, tied for the 3rd most in a season in NFL history. And you look at their point differential, plus 188, highest by a team through 13 games since the 2019 Ravens, who ended up as the number 1 seed in the AFC. But they've been dominant at home. They've been mediocre on the road, going 3-3. It was good to see the Dallas Cowboys actually do have a punter on their roster, though, as Brian Anger was forced into action for the first time Thanksgiving last Sunday night in the win over the Eagles. Meanwhile, for the Bills, you look at this team right now. Josh Allen put the team on his back, or I should say his legs. Passing numbers, not overly efficient in the win against the Chiefs, but did enough to be able to make things happen. The Bills, this is a team that's 12-1 in the regular season at home over the last 2 seasons, 10-2 overall, including 6 wins in a row. Beginning in Week 15 and later since 2020. The Cowboys, though, ATS juggernauts, 32-15 against the number since the start of 2021. It's the best mark in the league. The Bills haven't exactly lined people's pockets. Dallas offense, Payne. Dak Prescott firmly inserted his name in the MVP discussion, and rightfully so. Teams averaging 32.4 points per game, the most in football. They lead the NFL in both first downs per game and third down efficiency, but they're going into Western New York. The weather will not be all that favorable against the Bills defense, dealing with some injuries in their own right, but the one thing we've seen from the Bills, they can generate pressure, and from a points per game standpoint, one of the best teams in the league.
Yeah, I mean, this to me is probably the most intriguing matchup of the weekend, not just because of where these teams are power rated, but kind of how they've been playing, how they've been trending, who they've played against. I mean, the Cowboys' offense is red hot, and all of the changes we pounded the table for have mostly come to fruition since their bye. More passing on early downs, moving CeeDee Lamb around, better route tree concepts, using Dak's legs in short yardage and inside the red zone. I mean, it's all happened. It's been a complete 180. Now, you have a very confident Cowboys offense, right? McCarthy and Dak are feeling themselves, there's no doubt. And the Dallas offensive improvements, I think, are definitely real. You do have to ask and wonder how real. If you look during this offensive resurgence for Dallas, they have not played a defense better than 20th in schedule-adjusted efficiency. You had the Chargers, who are 27th, the Rams 23rd, the Eagles twice, who are 20th, the Giants 22nd, Panthers 29th, Commanders 32nd, and the Seahawks 26th. Those are the last 8 defenses Dallas has played. Now, you can ask the same thing about Buffalo, right? Started the season red hot defensively, then looked extremely poor against questionable offenses because they were just beaten and battered with injuries. Now, all of a sudden, defense has improved on the surface. It's getting a touch healthier. The addition of Rasul Douglas has been a perfect fit to McDermott's coverage concepts. So, no doubt the Bills are trending up a touch. in saying that, the Bills are taking a massive step up in class here, right? Buffalo's played one of the 5 easiest schedules of offenses this season. The last time Buffalo faced an offense in this same neighborhood as Dallas, even with weather assistance, Buffalo gave up 37 points and played a below-average defense in terms of EPA and success rate allowed. We also have to monitor the Micah Hyde injury.
Yep.
You mentioned the pressure that Buffalo's been getting. A.J. Epinesa is injured, didn't practice his Wednesday, so got to check him. I mean, that's just been... I mean, where has he been the last couple seasons? All of a sudden, the light came on for him.
Takes a little while, Payne. Everyone can't hit the ground running when they step into the NFL.
I think he spent 6 years at Iowa, and then, was this year 4 for him in the NFL? So, I mean, it's good to see the light finally come on, but he's been a key cog. The very best part of the Bills' defense, to your point this season, is their ability to get pressure, right? 4th in pass rush win rate, top 10 in pressure rate. There isn't a quarterback that's been better this season under pressure than Dak Prescott. Graded out QB number 1, 72% adjusted accuracy, 8% big-time throw rate. So he's attacking the attacker. Dak's been just unbelievable under duress, not making mistakes either. 1.6% turnover-worthy play rate when under pressure. He's just been outstanding. And right now, for me, probably the MVP.
Oh, he went there. The man went there.
And so this is ultimately when we see battles in a market, when you can truly make a case for either side. Now, like, you can deep dive games where, like, okay, this little thing over here and this little thing over there. And, like, legitimately you can make cases for both teams. And when there's large schedule discrepancies and you're trying to figure out which unit is for real, that's typically when you see these battles. And that's exactly how this game's unfolded, right? At 1.5, very sharp Bills money. Once we got to 2.5 minus 15, there was a well-respected group that made a buy in the Cowboys to the key and sent this game back down to 2. And I kind of think this is probably where we're going to live. I don't know if you want to give the opportunity for a cheaper buy to 3 if you get back to Buffalo at a juice 2.5. There's also been some sharp buys on Buffalo's money line here. I don't know where we go. I feel like 2's the right number here. And then the rest kind of falls in line. But you can see why there's this battle just because both units, right? But again, Buffalo's defense is trending up. The Cowboys' offense is absolutely humming right now. You could make the case that they could have had 40 or 50 if they were being pushed on Sunday night. But you get Dallas out of the confines of the dome onto the road where they haven't been quite as good offensively. 40 degrees, potential for some rainy stuff in the second half here, and you're taking a dome team out of that perfect environment, and they're potentially going up in class themselves. I don't know. This is just a lot of variance to me on that. In this matchup.
Well, when we look on the other side of the ball, then, I mean, this is a Buffalo offense that we know has its star power, but you watch them go out there and operate, and I think the best way to describe it is fits and spurts. I mean, Stephon Diggs on pace for his 4th consecutive season with 100-plus receptions and 1,000-plus receiving yards, but, I mean, held under 35 yards now in 3 of 4 games. Just one game during that stretch, he has more than 4 catches. James Cook's been a bit of a revelation, averaging 5.9 yards per touch this season, highest of any player in the NFL with 175 touches, but hadn't exactly been synonymous with finding the end zone. Gabriel Davis, great locker room guy from everything you read, but he disappears for stretches, can't get separation, and the player that Buffalo expected to be their true number 2 receiver hasn't quite been that guy that they can lean on. Sean McDermott couldn't help himself last week. You have a healthy Dawson Knox. Got to get him out there, cut into Dalton Kincaid's workload, because why go away from what was working? And Josh Allen, we know, puts up gaudy numbers. He's shown to be more aggressive in high leverage spots when it comes to using his legs, but still only threw for 230 yards last week in the win against the Kansas City Chiefs. And here comes a Dallas Cowboys defense, Payne, that's dealing with a big injury in its own right. Jonathan Hankins, the most notable injury to watch along the defensive line. I know he hasn't officially been ruled out, but high ankle sprain should probably sideline him for a bit. And when you lose one of your big run stuffers, it puts a lot on the plate of Mazi Smith, who's been asked to do more for run defense, and it could be a major problem. The Eagles' offense, I know they didn't score an offensive touchdown, but they did cross into Dallas territory on 6 drives Sunday night. 2 of those trips ended in relatively harmless field goals. The other 4 ended with the Cowboys' defense taking the ball away via the fumble, and 1 drive coming up short on downs. There's some star power with Micah Parsons and Deron Bland, but against a Buffalo defense going out on the road, Buffalo offense, going out on the road, this matchup may be as fascinating as what we expect from the other side of the ball with Dak Prescott against that pass rush of the Buffalo Bills.
Again, and it's not to beat a dead horse, like as you present that game, a lot of variance. Like in general, the Dallas defense has been boom or bust. They're feast or famine. It's an aggressive unit by nature. Like when they're getting pressure and turning you over, the Cowboys defense loves to play that role of front runner. And we've seen it against the Giants twice, and the Jets, and the Patriots, and the Panthers, and the Commanders. But the Seahawks offense went up and down the field on the Cowboys. Positive 0.26 EPA per play, 49% success rate. The Eagles, you mentioned, as you dig into these games a little bit deeper and not just be, mentally discombobulated by the scoreboard, you can start to abstract some things that make a little bit more sense. And so, you'll see 6 offensive points. Philly's defense outscored its offense. But down to down, Philly was the 5th best offense last week, 46% success rate. Philly made it to the Dallas 34-yard line or closer 6 times, to your point there, Todd. So I'm having trouble assessing what this Dallas defense is. The problem is, what is Buffalo's offense? And that's a question.
Might be an even better question.
We shouldn't have to ask it. Should not have to even wonder about it when you think about Josh Allen and Diggs and the other plus offensive talent with 4 weeks left in the season, right? Like, you shouldn't be asking that question. What version of the Bills' offense are we getting? Last week, you think about this, and let me just throw this out there. If you're the 2-minute handicap guy, you're going to land on Buffalo here. Right? More urgency. The game is vital for them. But you go last week and look at this. It was Buffalo's Super Bowl. Biggest game of the season, off the bye, revenge against KC. The target is obvious. And the Bills win. And so, the playoff hopes are revitalized. McDermott got the monkey off his back. Post-game, the Bills fans can, circle jerk each other outside the stadium, sharing filing cabinet pizza or whatever goes on there. But the Bills were dog shit the final 2.5 quarters. That, to me, wasn't a confidence-building performance that I expected to see in a win, specifically the offense. The Bills had a 30% success rate after the 2 touchdown drives the rest of the game. Negative 0.15 EPA per play over that same stretch. The offense continued to look clunky for a large portion of this game. And, I think it's vital that the Bills come out with an aggressive game plan. Doesn't mean going away from the run, and you hinted at that, Todd. I do think you fire up James Cook, and it's good to see him getting more involved, and it doesn't necessarily just need to be as a runner, but play the kid more. He's basically got 52% of the backfield touches the last month. That's not enough. The hard-on for Murray and Johnson is wild because James Cook is just a matchup nightmare. You mentioned Jonathan Hankins, the big fella in the middle of the field. High ankle sprain. They're calling it questionable. If it's the Trevor Lawrence variant of a high ankle sprain, he'll probably be out there.
Sunday. Hankins is out there playing Sunday. I would be impressed as all hell.
But you're looking at the Cowboys, and this is what's interesting. They're 25th in run-stop win rate, but they're 6th in schedule-adjusted run defense, which signals to me regression for the Cowboys' run defense could be coming. But my thought here in general is, with this Bills offense, you need more aggression. You have to be willing to attack the attacker. If you're going to be conservative against an attacking defense like the Cowboys, I think it's the wrong path. You want to see the Cowboys' third cornerback on the field, right? So that means more Shakir and Hardy out there. You want Bland being overly aggressive on Dix. You want to see Josh Allen use his legs more against a man-heavy defense like Dallas. The Cowboys live in man, right? Highest rate of man coverage usage in the NFL. Dallas is going to get pressure one way or another, right? They're number 1 in pass rush win rate. They pressure quarterbacks in more than 43% of dropbacks. It's a top 3 rate in the league. Josh Allen's going to get touched in this game regardless. You'd rather have it on his own accord, right? Running downfield and getting hit than being swarmed in his own backfield. You'd rather have that contact as he's just finishing an attacking pass that leads to an explosive. And I kind of think of it this way. It's like the reward has to be worth the risk. If Josh Allen's getting hit, the reward can't be a 4-yard dump off to Dawson Knox. It's got to be a 20-yard seam to Diggs, you know? And so I think the Bills have to be willing to be aggressive here. And Josh Allen, if he doesn't turn it over and you are aggressive on offense, Buffalo will win this game. I mean, Dallas is feasted on turnovers. You would think regression's coming at some point. It just never has happened under Dan Quinn. But if you look at the Cowboys' defense, they are merely average if they're not turning you over. I mean, we're talking below average down to down for this Cowboys defense if you remove turnovers. And that below average down to down defense come against a schedule of bottom 5 offenses. So there's a clear path here if Joe Brady and Josh Allen are on their game Sunday.
I mean, look, you mentioned how you want to get the extra corners out there for Dallas. One of the biggest weaknesses for this group all season long has been attacking the slot. I mean, going after Jordan Lewis. So if Buffalo can be creative and exploit that area of the field, there's a path to this offense being successful. But this game takes on massive level of importance for Buffalo should they be able to try and get one step closer to the AFC playoffs, a team that you talked about in terms of taking a little bit of money as a long shot in the futures market. That market is caught up and then some. The Bills right now looking at plus 115 or thereabouts to make the playoffs, and this is a team that may have to win out to try and get there. The only thing that works in their favor, the Dolphins' schedule not exactly favorable down the stretch, and we could be talking about a Bills-Dolphins showdown. Loser leaves town for Sunday Night Football and the AFC East Championship if everything unfolds the way it possibly could.
What do you make of Buffalo, by the way? I'm asking you because I think
if Allen doesn't turn the ball over, it's a top 5 team in the league. If Allen decides he wants to get...
Even with what they're doing on offense, you think that's the case?
I think that...
Even with their defense not playing like a soul?
I think their defense is one of the more perplexing units because I do think their ability to create big plays and go out there and generate pressure gives them an opportunity. But at the same time, you highlighted it. I mean, the second half against Philadelphia and in a game that they really needed to win, playing with the lead, the offense reined it in a little bit, and this isn't a defense that I trust to go out there and pitch shutouts. They may be able to create an explosive play. They may be able to get you behind the down and distance, but do I think from a down-to-down standpoint, despite numbers that suggest they're one of the best at suppressing points, allowing, 18.8 points per game, there are a lot of questions that Buffalo still has to answer, and I think as a result, you're not talking about a narrow window of performance for this team, one where they have a relatively high floor, but I don't think the ceiling for this group is nearly as high as what it's been over the last couple seasons.
That's actually good you said that because that's kind of my vibe. The reason all of the future prices were nabbed on Buffalo is because of like the talent and the pedigree, but also what's around them. You think about some of those 7 and 6 teams, right? It's Cincinnati, it's the Steelers.
Everybody's a mess in the
Colts,
AFC right
it's
now.
The Broncos. And so you can see the path. The Dolphins' schedule, to your point, got much tougher. And no one on planet Earth in like a 1-game sample size wants to face the Buffalo Bills as the wild card team. And I think from our perspective, talking about games when you think about them coming in the playoffs, like I'd much rather talk about a Bills matchup than I would
100%.
like a Steelers or Colts matchup, right? I expected to be blown away by their performance last week. I expected that just to be a Mona Lisa. And I get they won the game. I get they covered. That was utter dog shit for 2.5 quarters of that game. And to your point, it kind of left me saying, even though you have a Diggs and a Josh Allen and a defensive-minded coach that's kind of figuring it out and a defense that can get pressure and, you know, hopefully in another 4 or 5 or 6 weeks, Von Miller's even healthier. I wasn't blown away. I was not blown away.
The Diggs stuff for me is perplexing because he was putting up gangbuster numbers early in the year, and he has really fallen off a cliff, whether it's team scheming differently or it's Joe Brady trying to spread the ball around. I'll also kind of play devil's advocate a little bit on that because for Buffalo, look, we have to give them some credit. I mean, they went into one of the more hostile environments you can find in the AFC. I know they were a bit fortuitous with the offensive offsides being called on Kadarius Toney, and it changes the tenor of that game should they come up short, squandering a lead in the final 2 minutes. But getting that win can sometimes be the spark that a team needs. Now, if they're able to carry that momentum forward, that remains to be seen. But I think you highlighted the other thing. When you look at the AFC, there are 11 teams right now in the conference with winning records, the most through week 14 in any conference since 1970. And every single one of those teams, if you look at them from top to bottom and you come in with a critical eye, has a flaw. I know it feels like a broken record where we talk about, everything in the AFC playoffs is going to be matchup based. It really does feel that way, that there are certain teams that are going to want to avoid other teams. But when you look at Buffalo, I mean, this is a team that projects at most a soft 3.5 if they have to go into Baltimore. And I'm not even sure they'd be more than a field goal underdog in that particular contest.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's not a wild card team that any of the big boys are going to want to see in the playoffs, just because you know what their potential peak is with Josh Allen. This is a big game here.
And you know what? So is the game on Sunday Night Football between the Baltimore Ravens and the Jacksonville Jaguars, not just for seeding purposes, but for the division, where the Ravens are now more than a field goal favorite, laying 3.5 at some respected shops, although there are plenty of 3 -20s out there, and a total of 42.5 for their trip to North Florida. The Ravens at this point have an inside track to the number 1 seed in the AFC, but they'll need to earn it. They have the hardest remaining strength to schedule in the NFL, with their last 4 games all versus current playoff teams, including the next 3 against division leaders. The Ravens became the 6th team since 2000 last week to lead in the final 2 minutes in each of their first 13 games of the season. They spent the 4th most time leading by any team through 13 games, going all the way back to the 2000 season, joining the ranks of the 2005 Indianapolis Colts, the 2011 Green Bay Packers, and the 2007 New England Patriots. Meanwhile, for Jacksonville, we've talked about them experiencing a lot of firsts this year, and Sunday night will mark yet another, becoming the Jags' first appearance on Sunday Night Football since 2008. It's their 3rd primetime game of the season. They beat the New Orleans Saints on a Thursday Night Football game back in Week 7 and lost to the Bengals in their first Monday Night Football appearance in 12 season. Trevor Lawrence talked about the level of excitement, but it's still just another game for a team that has to go out there and try and perform. Here come the Ravens, Payne, road favorites, fresh off of an overtime game where they had to outlast the Los Angeles Rams. It was the Tylan Wallace punt return that led to a 37-31. Lamar Jackson, 300 yards passing, 70 yards rushing, but it stretches in that game looked like he could have thrown for 500 with the amount of open receivers he missed against that Rams secondary. But if Baltimore wants to be that aggressive, they threw downfield a hell of a lot more last week against the Rams. There are going to be plenty of vertical shots to be taken against the Jacksonville secondary that is taking on water, and the injury report didn't leave a whole lot of optimism with Tyson Campbell and Andre Sisco missing practice on Wednesday.
Yes, that is the clear path. I think when you talk about that path, you have to also mention that it's some possibility for weather. For now, this game being played at 8:20 could be the saving grace. And I think that time slot potentially allows this to play a little bit more true. Weather can change instantly, especially in Florida, so you got to keep monitoring that. But as it stands now, from about 4 a.m. Sunday morning until 6 p.m. Sunday evening, we're talking about 20-mile-per-hour sustained winds with gusts into the 40s and heavy rain. Right around 6 p.m., the winds decrease and the rain subsides. That could change again by the minute. So you're really going to want to pay attention to that. Now, both the Ravens offense and the Jaguars defense have some oddities to them, I would say. You look at Baltimore's offense. On paper, they are looking good, but they've not been. When I look at the schedule, right, like the Ravens offense is stepping up in class here. You look, they've faced defenses with an average efficiency rank of 25th the last 4 weeks, and it just has looked a little, I wouldn't say as clunky as the Bills, just not as clean from Baltimore over that stretch since Mark Andrews went down. When you adjust for schedule, they're outside the top 10. Baltimore is in success rate. The Jaguars defense, though, is downtrending hard. And I think that's one thing that might be going a little unnoticed. Jacksonville's playing more like the unit we had questions about coming into the season. Bottom 8 defense in both EPA and success rate the last 4 weeks, and that's come against 2 rookie quarterbacks, Jake Browning and Joe Flacco. And so that leaves you a little bit concerned. And to your point there, Todd, Tyson Campbell and Andre Sisco, who are 2 key cogs in the Jaguars secondary, were DNPs on Wednesday. Campbell did not play last week. Sisco left early. Today, Thursday, the big day to monitor those 2 injuries. And that's where Jacksonville's defense has been really susceptible, right, through the air. It's tough to kind of remove the Jaguar game, or the Bengals game, rather, from your mind because it was prime time and it's recent and somewhat fresh. But Jacksonville still is a top 3 schedule-adjusted run defense. But you look at what they're allowing through the air since their Week 9 bye. Over 50% of the passes against Jacksonville have graded successful. That's the 4th most in the NFL. Giving up 8.6 yards per pass attempt, 2nd most in the NFL. Completion rate surrendered, 72%. It's the highest in the NFL over that stretch. And so you like some of the matchups. OBJ has been on fire. You like what Baltimore is doing there internally as a staff, kind of preserving OBJ. It's really been all about preservation through the season. If he gets even the slightest injury, we're keeping him out the week. We're holding him out of practices. Even in-game, right? The route precipitation, Jesus Christ, I did it again, 2nd week in a row. Participation.
It's all right. They both start with B in the end and an N. You're okay.
is in the mid 50% range, so he's not getting a ton of snap usage. But when he's in the game, I mean, he's the focal point of the pass offense. I mean, you're seeing target rates 30 to 40% when OBJ's actually on the field. Over the last 6 weeks, if you look at all qualifying receivers in yards per route run, OBJ only trails a guy named Tyreek Hill. So, I mean, he has been fantastic. I think we're sitting there at O'Brien's last week, and it's a little bit of a weather game there, and Lamar wasn't completely on, and OBJ's just, his adjustments to the ball in the air were just fantastic. Isaiah Likely finally got going a little bit, and he's got a nice matchup here against the Jacksonville linebackers and safeties, especially if Sisco misses. Jaguars are bottom 10 in EPA allowed to the tight end position. So there is a clear path through the air for Baltimore if the weather doesn't rear its head and become a factor here, Todd.
You mentioned some of the drop in performance from Lamar Jackson. I mean, his completion percentage was amongst the league best, 70%, 8.1 yards per attempt in the first 11 games this season. And while it's a much shorter sample size, without Mark Andrews, that number's now dipped to 56%, 6.6 yards per attempt in the 2 games since Andrews ended. And Lamar was pretty open about that, said that was a security blanket. When they went into the scramble drill, Andrews was the guy they looked for. Now it almost appears that if things break down, Lamar is becoming much more willing as a runner, and you saw him with 70 rushing yards against the Rams, who don't generate much in the way of pass rush. Now, on the other side, Payne, when we look at this Jacksonville offense, I mean, Trevor Lawrence deserves a world of credit for going out there and gutting it out with that high ankle sprain through 3 touchdowns, but did get picked off 3 times in the loss last week against the Cleveland Browns. Was just 5 of 16 for 54 yards and a pick when pressured, 2 for 4 for 11 yards outside the pocket. You have to imagine Doug Peterson is going to place an emphasis on getting the ball out of his hands quickly, much like they did against the Saints on that Thursday night game earlier this year when we weren't sure if Lawrence was going to be a go with that knee injury. But the bigger problem for Jacksonville right now is they can't get things going on the ground. Travis Etienne averaged 3.3 yards per carry since the beginning of November as he's dealt with some injuries. The offensive line has been banged up. It's now 5 straight games with 56 rushing yards or less, and it's taken away some of the balance that made this team so dynamic when they went on that 5-game winning streak earlier this season. Evan Ingram, a massive day against Cleveland, should have a path a little bit against this Baltimore Ravens defense. But Baltimore defensively, for me, look, left a lot to be desired last week against the Rams. Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp had big days. They struggled to stop the Rams. There at one point in the game, the Rams were able to move the football and ran it 9 straight times. And this is a Ravens defense dealing with injuries in their own right. I expect Roquan Smith to be out there, but Kyle Hamilton, even as a limited participant in practice this week, appears to be much more touch and go dealing with that grade 1 MCL sprain.
A little more Dallas money into the market. A couple more 1.5s here popping. For this one, the Trevor Lawrence ankle injury, I don't think as bad as we all thought watching it live, but it's a factor. I mean, kudos to him. We kind of bust his balls and, nickname him Sunshine. He's got the long hair and the great skin, and you kind of associate that with being a different type of player toughness-wise. But Trevor Lawrence is tough as nails. He plays hurt, doesn't miss games. His body's like Gumby. In saying that, you could tell he's somewhat limited in mobility. Lawrence was struggling this season under pressure prior to the injury, and last week it was just dreadful. I mean, Trevor's turnover-worthy play rate was higher than his passer rating under pressure. 17% turnover-worthy play rate when pressured, 16 passer rating when pressured. Jacksonville couldn't really run any of its play-action packages, and when they did, Lawrence was horrific. But again, even before the ankle injury, Lawrence was, effectively Zach Wilson under pressure. And being less mobile, getting added to the equation probably isn't the best. You'd think this game is on Trevor because, sure, you are seeing the Ravens defense downtrend a little bit against the run, but we've seen that Rams offense start to hike up their run efficiency the minute Kyron Williams returned. Jacksonville really doesn't have that type of ground game, right? It's a bottom 10 run game in the NFL, and so, I think this has the potential, unless it's tight and Doug and Press Taylor are trying to kind of preserve Trevor Lawrence, it becomes a little bit of a pass funnel game. And I do think the injuries matter on this side of the matchup. Like, if it does become a pass funnel game for Jacksonville and Lawrence doesn't have 100% mobility, it gets a little bit tricky. Jacksonville's 30th in pass block win rate. You have your starting left tackle, Cam Robinson, is out. We mentioned last week that the backup left tackle, Walker Little, was likely to miss. He didn't end up playing. Little did return to practice on Wednesday in a limited fashion. Got to monitor that. Ezra Cleveland, the below-average guard, left the Browns game early. He played left tackle snaps out of necessity. He logged a limited on Wednesday. Again, another one you want to monitor. But, past those two injuries, where the problem lies is Anton Harrison, the rookie. Listen, he's kind of been thrown into the fire. It was a position of need for Jacksonville. Anton Harrison was supposed to be a project, at least for the first 12 months, right? Get him in the weight room, get that part of his game figured out. He's just not been good. Graded out 56th among 63 qualifying tackles. Tyler Shatley was an undrafted free agent in 2014. He's been with Jacksonville for his entire career between spot duty and starting out of necessity. Shatley has graded out above replacement level for one season. Luke Fortner at center continues to get worse, if that's humanly possible. And so now you're going against a Ravens defense who's fringe top 10 in a lot of the pass rushing metrics. The Kirk injury is certainly meaningful. There's now 7 quarters of data on how Peterson wants to run this offense without Kirk, the team's best man cover beater. So, kind of thrown into the fire, it was Parker Washington. He filled that role extremely well against Cincinnati. All of a sudden, he's going to be the guy, and he struggled mightily against Cleveland. Couldn't get off press coverage, really. Jamal Agnew showed up at practice for Jacksonville on Wednesday. Let's monitor that because that would be a huge get back for the offense if you can start to use him in that slot role. You mentioned the 2 injuries to monitor for Buffalo's defense, and they're massive, right? Today's a key day for both Kyle Hamilton and Roquan Smith to see kind of how they're trending with the knee and the back injuries. To your point, I think Roquan's certainly more likely. Kyle Hamilton, though, we talk about him like the ultimate queen on the chessboard, the way Mike McDonald moves him around. Roquan is certainly the heartbeat of the Ravens defense, and he just makes guys around him better. We saw that uptick from Patrick Queen the minute they went and made that trade for Roquan Smith. So from a price perspective, this game to me is just really, really interesting, right? If the Jaguars offense is healthy or a little bit healthier, and the weather isn't a concern, this total is extremely short. And in theory, the price might be a little high at 3.5. And I know you and I talked off air, Todd, but Baltimore just went into L.A. and closed a shorter favorite against the Chargers. And Jacksonville is certainly a favorite over the Chargers with Justin Herbert. So this game is very much about who is available and if they're available, how truly healthy they are. And then you start doing the math equation from there on those players' values.
It's always interesting when you look at some of the comparative data points that are there, and that Chargers game fascinating because we had talked about that. That game opened with Baltimore a 4.5 point favorite, got as low as 3, ended up a juice 3 despite overwhelming public support, and they needed a late touchdown reception for Zay Flowers to take that from a 13-10 lead to 20-10. Jacksonville, you wonder if it's an opportunity to buy low, but if they're banged up and a defense that's trending as poorly, given the numbers that you highlighted, some real red flags for a team that's got a little bit more competition in the AFC South than they expected, but the Jags get a fortuitous bounce, especially if C.J. Stroud can't go this week at Tennessee, and the Indianapolis Colts, I think water started to meet its level with Gardner Minshew not being able to make that offense all that dynamic, and we'll see how that looks on Saturday against the Pittsburgh Steelers. You can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, for all things Bet the Board related, follow the podcast feed at Bet the Board Pod. And Payne, it's that time in the program where we try and put all of our heavy lifting to good use and find the most actionable component for our loyal Bet the Board listeners. What have we found for a best bet opportunity for Week 15?
So it's one of the games that we discussed a little bit earlier, Saturday night. Let's go with the Lions. Rotation number 312. Let's lay the 4 on the Detroit Lions. Broke that game down again a little bit earlier, so it'll be time-stamped above. I do see a situation where Denver probably has some relative success on offense. I just think the way Detroit's positioned here offensively in this matchup is going to lead them to having success and ultimately covering this game. You mentioned some of the injuries on the Broncos defense. I think when you look at the Lions' ability to run the ball in this spot, going to be extremely efficient. If you just look at a lot of the predictive numbers in terms of run game, and you think about the Broncos defense in terms of yards allowed before first contact, rate of runs that gain 3+ yards, rate of runs that gain 5+, rate of runs that gain 10+, and then flip it around to the Lions offense and look at, yards per rush before first contact, 3+ yard runs, 5+. They are just, it's a massive dichotomy. It's one of the largest deltas of the week. And then you think about Goff being back in the dome, comfy confines, the coverages the Broncos use, Goff has been very good against. Going to be able to use his security blanket there in Matt LaPorta because the Broncos are 31st defending the tight end position. You think about who Denver's faced recently in terms of their run offenses as well, bottom feeders and number 32 and number 26. I think the Lions offense gets healthy here in this spot in a major way. And so, again, rotation number 312, Detroit Lions -4, best bet.
Another chapter in the Russell Wilson-Jared Goff rivalry that no one knew they ever needed takes place this Saturday evening out there in the Motor City. Should be an absolutely electric environment for Detroit, a team that needs to get back to what they do best, regain some of that identity as what we thought was going to be an insurmountable lead in the NFC North. Not quite the case anymore with the Green Bay Packers, Minnesota Vikings, and even the Chicago Bears playing much better football than they were this time about 6 weeks ago. All right, my friend, I know this was a bit of a cram session for us with the travel plans and everything else to try and run this out there like a fire drill, but I think we did damn fine without some of the extra time that we normally would have allocated for the show. And again, I want to thank all of our listeners who tuned in on Monday. Billy for doing an outstanding job, as always, in our absence. And look, from here on out,
under the weather too. He was sick as a dog.
Look,
Went
we're
out
all,
there,
look, we're all
battled on
questionable
Monday
this time of year. That's the bottom line. You go out there, you play hurt, and you have to try and grin and bear it. But yeah, this should be a big stretch run. We know December taking us all the way through the craziness of Super Bowl. Will be with you every step of the way for all the NFL action in the playoff races, the biggest bowl games, and a lot of other great content that's out there. Any final words of wisdom, things that you'd like to offer up, your critique, criticism, or praise for your Madison Square Garden experience on back-to-back nights? If you had anything good to say about the pizza shop that you dragged me to on Monday, which exceeded my expectations, I mean, now's the chance.
John's a bleaker. Gotta go.
Hey,
It's a must stop spot when you're in New York City.
It's a good pizza spot. That is for sure. Want to wish all of our listeners the best of luck wherever their investments take them this weekend across the college and pro football gridiron. We'll be back with you on Monday to talk things Seahawks and Eagles and recap the week that was. But in the meantime, with the Detroit Lions ticket in hand come Saturday evening, we'll see you at the window.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Fuhrman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.